So here we are with employers in Australia screaming out for staff. Here we are with a report today telling us our job seekers don't have the skills to match the vacancies. And of course, we also have older Australians desperate to get back into the workforce. Cue a real solution from the National Seniors Group, which wants to see the government, or any government, redesign the age pension. How about we stop financially punishing pensioners who want to continue working? You take New Zealand. 25% of the over 65s there are still working. That's because Kiwis don't lose their pension when they work. They just pay tax on that extra pay packet. Does that not make sense? Pensioners here, well, they earn more than $240 a week. You lose 50 cents in the dollar. We're ranked 18 out of 37 OECD countries for labour force participation. It's an embarrassment. I spoke to Henschke from the National Seniors Group earlier today, and I asked him, why are we punishing older Australians who just want to work?
Well, I suppose it's because we view the pension as a welfare payment, and so we've got this punitive system built in. But if you look across to New Zealand, where they don't have a punitive system, they simply pay tax on their earnings, and surprise, surprise, 1 in 4 pensioners in New Zealand is working. In Australia, the figure's as low in the last ABS study at 2.9% of pensioners work. Of course, we've got people that are not pensioners that are working in Australia, and the total amount of people working in Australia is about 14%. But if you look around the world, Sweden, Israel, Japan, a whole range of countries, they have a much higher participation rate. So I think because we need workers at the moment, we need to fix the system and encourage people to work, not discourage them from working. And what we do is that when they work more than one day, they start to lose 50 cents in the dollar from their pension. Then they pay tax on top of that, which is another 19 cents. So you can see that people very rapidly say it's not worth it.
If we adopted, for instance, the New Zealand model, we could fill so many of those workforce gaps, but also add to GDP, right?
Oh, yes. Look, Chris Richardson from Access Economics back, I think it was in 2012, did a report for the then Commissioner for Age Discrimination, and he found that if you had a 5% increase in older workers in Australia, it would add, wait for it, $47.9 billion to the GDP, and that was in 2012, which would be $60 billion today. Now, when you see people like Josh Frydenberg and others saying, oh, we've got to build the economy, we've got to build the economy, the last thing you want to do is actually push workers out of the economy, which is what we're doing with a punitive pension system. So I think it has to be changed, and I would like to see it happen sooner rather than later. I don't think we have to wait until the election to do it. This is something that could be done almost immediately. Get the money back through the tax system and encourage people to work. Don't push people away from jobs, especially when we need them. And they're talking about bringing in 350,000 people from overseas. Do you realise that if we had the same workforce participation rate as New Zealand, we'd have hundreds of thousands of more workers, because we've got 4 million people over 65 in Australia. So if we had that same participation rate there as they've got in New Zealand, we'd have 1 million older Australians working. We've only got a fraction of that at the moment. We've only got 74,000 pensioners working.
The numbers make so much sense, but on top of all of that, getting back to migration, it avoids a major party like the Coalition or Labor making a controversial call, and it is controversial, to have big migration numbers back in Australia.
Yes, and look, this is why I keep coming back to these figures from overseas. In Japan, more than 20% of over 65s are still doing some form of work. In Sweden, they're doing the same. In America, they're doing the same. In New Zealand, as I said, 25% of over 65s are still working. In Australia, we've got 14% of older Australians working. And when you get down to the pensioners, it's less than 3% of pensioners. So if you adjust these levers, then you actually stimulate the economy. You stop the need to bringing in hundreds of thousands of people to fill these jobs. And most importantly, look at the health and aged care sector in particular, which National Seniors is very concerned about. That nurse I was telling you about before, she's not going to go and work if she's going to be effectively fined for working during COVID. No. But if you said, look, you're allowed to work, go and work and we'll get the money back through the tax system. We'd have nurses working. We'd have people working in hospitality. We'd have people doing all sorts of jobs. And just look around the world at all the people that are still working. I mean, Rupert Murdoch's still working. Joe Biden's 79. Sir David Attenborough's 95. They're all still working. I turn 67 tomorrow. I'm still working. You know, I mean, people can still contribute. People can still contribute. Just because they've got grey hair doesn't mean they're finished. In many cases, they've actually got the skills that are desperately needed in our society.
And then all of a sudden, you don't need to be dependent on workforces from abroad. That makes a lot of sense. And this push has the backing of some heavy hitters too, hasn't it?
Oh, yes. The Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry has actually written a letter directly to Josh Frydenberg. I've seen that letter. I've heard nothing back from Canberra or from them. We've written a letter directly to Josh Frydenberg and the opposition saying, fix it. But interestingly enough, the person who is pushing one of the hardest on this, and she's actually spoken to Andrew Bolt about this, I understand, is Gina Rinehart. Because in Western Australia, they have 50,000 vacancies in Western Australia alone. And she said, why do we have a punitive pension system that punishes people when they turn 66 and a half years of age? If they continue to work, they lose 50 cents in the dollar and pay tax on top of that. And you know what? They're paying more tax than anyone else in Australia, effectively, because you've got a tax system which is 19 cents in the dollar, then it goes to 32 cents in the dollar. And so you're actually talking about people paying 80 cents in the dollar. And then if they keep working, they lose the pension completely. So we've got a system that is totally geared to pushing people away from work. Don't work. Whereas in New Zealand, they've got a system which says, come on, work, we need you. And of course, the result's quite simple. And the same in other countries around the world. We need to fix this and fix this urgently. Absolutely, it is an absolute priority. And I can tell you, Chris, I've never met a topic that I've discussed where so many people say it's a no-brainer, it makes sense, why don't they do it?
Yeah, I intend to put this to the Treasurer next time I have him on the program. Ian Henschke, an outstanding idea, and it needs to be pursued, not just being given lip service. Thank you very much for your time.